Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this webinar on policy push towards feasibility of nature-based solutions for cities. This webinar is being conducted through the project Greening Urban Food Systems, Building Sustainable Urban Agriculture Practices in Bengaluru through nature-based solutions, supported by the Agence Francaise de Developpement, AFD. This project focuses on building urban ecosystems and resilience through urban agriculture and nature-based solutions. As per the IUCN, nature-based solutions leverage nature and the power of healthy ecosystems to protect people, optimize infrastructure, and safeguard a stable and biodiverse future. Today, nature-based solutions are being implemented for solving urban problems of air and water pollution, water security, land degradation and pollution, agriculture, heat stress management, etc., for achieving sustainable development goals. At today's webinar, we have carefully chosen a set of expert panelists who include policy specialists, waste management expert, food systems expert, biodiversity expert, nature-based solution specialist, and we welcome you all for this panel discussion. I would now request our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And before that, I would like to tell you about myself. I am Dr. Indira Singh, lead at the School of Environment and Sustainability, IIHS. I will be moderating this session on behalf of Ms. Pratigna, who could not join us for this event because she fell sick, unfortunately. I work in the space of agricultural sustainability through the angle of soil microbial health. And now, without much ado, I would like to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. I would ask Soubadra to please go first. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Trained as an ecologist, particularly my focus has been on pollinators and pollination. So right from working on the tropical tall evergreen forest canopy pollination, now I moved to the urban system, which I think is very critical, and particularly trying to integrate pollination service into agriculture, because urban agriculture is all about growing vegetables, and people think about nutrients and water, but fail to look at pollinators, which is an important ingredient for urban agriculture.
Right. Thank you, Soubadra. Can I ask Saskia to please introduce herself?
Yeah, hello. I'm Saskia van Nauhuis, and I'm a professor of ecology at IISc here in Bangalore. And my background is to a large extent the effects of habitat fragmentation on populations and on communities and on biodiversity. And some of my work, most of my work is not exactly in an urban setting, but in an agricultural or human setting, although some of it is also in an urban setting. And I work mostly with insects and plants, but teach and think more broadly about other types of organisms.
Wow, nice. Thank you, Saskia. Meenal, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Indira. My name is Meenal. I have been working with communities living in and around forests for about 10 years now. My work has mostly involved looking at the interaction between, or the interface between the Forest Rights Act and other laws in India. I'm closely observing the development of nature-based solutions because I'm also a member of the CBD Women's Caucus. And there are quite a few concerns from indigenous peoples, local communities, women about nature-based solutions. So being a lawyer also and looking at policy, I'm interested in looking at some of the terms that have come up in the recent years in climate negotiations as well as biodiversity negotiations, and how the implementation of these terms affects grassroots communities. Thanks.
Wow. Welcome, Meenal. Thank you. Neha, would you like to go now?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm Neha Sami. I'm with the School of Environment and Sustainability at IIHS. I also lead the research program there, and a lot of my work has focused largely on questions of environmental governance. I also look at kind of the politics and governance of large infrastructure projects and kind of the overlap between sustainability, environmental governance, and urban and regional governance.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha. So, Nupur, please introduce yourself, Nupur.
Hi, hello everybody. This is Nupur Tandon and I'm a social entrepreneur. I started Pro Waste Concepts Private Limited 10 years back, and since then we are working with communities and institutions and campuses to make them greener and cleaner. We create zero waste campuses, and our vision is a future without landfills. We work with the communities at the ground level to empower them, educate them, and execute waste management processes so that waste is converted into resource. Thank you so much.
Very nice to have you here, Nupur. Thank you very much. I'll also add something about Nupur. Nupur also is part of the community where we are, the apartment where we are doing some interventions through the AFD project. So we have added I mean, she has dual role to play here in this particular discussion. So now I'll start with the questions. So I'm just wanting to let all the panelists know that you have just 5 minutes to answer all the questions because we have limitation of time. So I'll just put up a question, and this question can be answered by any one of you. You can decide if whoever wants to go for it, you can let me know and we can start. So the question is, nature-based solutions can only be useful to address climate change and global issues if they are implemented with integrity. What, according to you, is required for successful implementation of nature-based solutions? So who would like to go for this? I think Soubadra, would you like to take a stab at it?
Yeah. Well, I think everybody now is talking about multiple functionality, right? So I think the entry point can be one thing which the stakeholders interested. Let me tell you the story from our own experience. We have the urban lake. I mean, people only focus on the water, right? Improving the water through nature-based solution, but often forget the shore or the bank. So we sort of use butterflies as an entry point and created a butterfly trail and started slowly making it more, bringing in more biodiversity, making it more biodiversity positive, and also trying to integrate a little bit of agriculture in this common spaces. So we really cannot be sticking to one functions, and people are realizing it has to be multifunctional. And I think people want proof and they want exemplars. And that's something even to catch the attention of policymakers. I think we need to have exemplars and working thing which demonstrate multiple functionality. We can't just be doing something, a green roof, just for improving, I think climate change in that sense, heat islands, right? Reducing the heat and those mitigation effects.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, so I agree that, I mean, she's brought up very important points. One, it has to be multifunctional. And then we have to provide the proof that it's working, and there have to be some exemplars set up. So does one of you want to talk about what exemplars can be put up in the space, of nature-based solutions? Say for instance, in the food systems. Neha, would you like to say something about how nature-based solutions can be useful in the food system space?
So, I mean, I actually, not so much from the food system space, but I mean, given the work that I've been doing around working with communities that work on urban agriculture and related kind of issues. I think a lot of the barriers or enablers, however you choose to look at them, have been from the lack of institutional infrastructures that enable some of these kinds of policies and solutions from being implemented. Even though there is a lot of kind of interest in implementing them ground up, it always runs into sort of issues, say, for example, with the plan, with citing of some of these things, with also there not being enough training and capacity building to be able to actually implement these across sort of a wider scale. And I think that to think a little bit more sort of broadly about how we can think about working more closely with various sort of institutional actors, and I think they were trying to do some of this through the AFT work as well, is to work with a range of institutional actors and stakeholders, whether it's from the private sector or from the communities or from local and state level governments, to be able to actually pull some of this together and find workable solutions across scales, because otherwise we won't actually be able to make any of these things move and work.
Very true. Thank you. I mean, she's right in the sense that she's bringing up the necessity of having a government backing and also awareness building. These are certain things that are required for nature-based solutions to be successful. So the next question that I would like to ask our panel is, what are the advantages that you all foresee from nature-based solutions? Anyone wants to go for it? Or maybe I'll ask a directed question to Nupur. Nupur, do you want to say something about the perspective, or give us your perspective on waste management and city development, how we can integrate them, and how nature-based solutions can be integrated in this particular space?
Yeah, sure. So we already know that what is ailing our waste management process in the city. I mean, we are really far from the desired results which we've seen even after so many interventions by the government. The Swachh Bharat mission, and even if we see Bangalore, there's BBMP and a lot of NGOs who've been trying to carry out a lot of programs and a lot of awareness being happening. But one thing which I have seen is that with my experience since just 10 years, that there's no systemic change that is happening. And systemic change has to happen across all stakeholders.
Right.
To implement the processes. We are talking about it, but at the ground level, there's a huge gap which is there, which involves the stakeholders. There can be people who are generating waste. I've really seen that still people do not know how to identify the categories of waste, and they're educated people, and then there is a group of people who are actually involved in waste handling directly, and there is various reasons why we are unable to manage it. There is lack of infrastructure, there's lack of capacity building, the lack of, again, education and awareness. So it is very important that we create a system or infrastructure where all stakeholders come together and we work towards it, not in silos, and make this happen at the ground level. Of course, natural interventions, like for example, only if we segregate our waste, we'll be able to have pure, clean, organic waste that can be composted and that will go back to our nature. And this is old age practice, and we've really stopped doing it, or we failed, or we've forgotten about it. Our green leaves which we get in the city, there's tons in those few months. Why is not there a system that all that green biomass goes back to our Mother Earth? It can be composted, used for mulching. So there are these questions I keep on asking to the communities, that why are they not doing it? And it is nothing, it's not a rocket science.
Correct.
Nothing new. It's just that we've forgotten, and somehow we've started living lives which are very easy, and we adopted the use and throw culture, and this was like wisdom and old age practices. So it is, we are a part of it. we've always, and we cannot say that, nature is, ecology and nature work separately and we human beings are life. We cannot, it is not separate. So we have to bring in totality. It's a holistic approach. So, yeah.
Yeah, very true. Thank you, Nupur. Yeah, she's brought out a very important element that we should channelize our waste to help agriculture and other our landscape greening and other things, which would be a very successful circular economy model, which needs to be integrated in our urban cities. So this is something, Meenal, what do you think about it? About nature-based solutions and these challenges, and can we probably what is the challenge in bringing the green waste? I mean, as we see today in the urban ecosystem, there are people are unwilling to do the segregation even properly. So if that is a main issue that needs to be addressed, so what are the policies that you think should be brought in this space?
So Indira, I'm just going to talk about my example as somebody living in Pune. And for the last 2 years, if I'm sure you've heard of the Pune Riverfront Development Project that has come up.
Yeah.
It is a project under smart cities, and the Pune Municipal Corporation is also trying to tout it as a nature-based solution. Now, across board, several citizens have been coming out in large numbers regarding this project, saying how unnecessary it is. So when we talk about systemic change, we have to understand that there is a river, there are riparian systems. We do not need a redevelopment project to come here. That finance and that money needs to be put into systemic changes, which includes cleaning up of the river, ensuring that our waste system is properly utilized. But the problem is that we have, again, within the Pune redevelopment project, river redevelopment project, what we have seen is that the aims and objectives of the project are stated in a certain way. The project is carried on in a certain way, including the felling of almost 6,000 odd trees. Now, here is the challenge of integrity that some of the panelists have brought up. And the problem is that nature-based solutions on the global level does not have a defined definition. IUCN has one definition. The EU has one definition. All the 3 Rio conventions do not seem to come on the same page regarding what the definition of nature-based solutions is. So you are clubbing anything and everything under nature-based solutions. And then that policy is being used on the ground to push for certain things that are not necessarily, you don't need to even touch those systems. So my problem with this is that it is not well defined. And if it's not well defined, you cannot have policy changes that are going to address the systemic issues that we are talking about. So also, when we talk about everybody needs to be involved, what we forget is that there are degrees of separation in our cities. We are looking at migrations on a very large scale coming from rural areas. These are people who do not have settlements within our cities. There are people like pastoralists, like smallholders. There are single women from very poor households who are dependent on the ecosystems that we are going to cordon off as nature-based solutions. So if we talk about greening of our parks, or if we talk about, protection, what are the terms that we are using, and who are the people that we are sort of putting the blame on for creating these problems? So these are also systemic issues that I think we need to be very conscious of when we are designing certain certain projects and certain aspects of the project, which we term as nature-based solutions. So I would say that it is a deep systemic issue, which one of the solutions is being touted as nature-based solutions, but it does not have an acceptability across all platforms. So how do we ensure that we get that at not just the international level, but also within the national level, and then we can begin designing policies. The other important thing is the dilution of our already existing laws, and I cannot stress this enough for India. Um, in the last 2 years, our Environment Protection Act has been diluted. Our Forest Conservation Act has a completely new meaning to it and a completely new objective to it. The preamble says addressing our NDCs, but is it actually addressing our NDCs? Because we have left out tons of acres of forest area from requiring forest consent. So it's very important when we talk about integrity, and I think IUCN has also come up with a global standards that talks about what needs to be done when we are saying nature-based solutions. So I think for any kind of policy to emerge, I would say that these are the important systemic changes that I think not just the government, but also at the society level, we need to have in mind. Yeah.
Very true. Yeah, Meenal has brought out very interesting point. One is that there is no one-stop solution for this. Every different stakeholders will need different inputs, and and also awareness building, and at different levels we'll have to bring in different types of interventions. So that's a very important point. Thank you. Saskia, would you like to talk about what are the biodiversity challenges that the city faces today, and can nature-based solutions be implemented to improve this solution? Do we have a solution through NBS?
Well, yeah. So I think that there's a huge number of challenges to biodiversity in urban environments, of course, as sort of a definition of being an urban environment. And some of I guess, if I think about cities such as Bangalore, that, things like public transportation, I think, if public transportation were increased by orders of magnitude so that, traffics and existing, road expansion, pollution, sort of the ability to maintain the green spaces that are still here, and trees to maintain the temperature and shade for both people and for other organisms. And, that I see sort of the increase in public transportation as potentially having a great impact on being able to conserve biodiversity and also quality of life for the people living in an urban setting.
Right.
So I think if I think about roads, traffic, pollution, those kinds of things which affect people directly, and then they affect all of the biodiversity, and they cause more area to be paved rather than exposed soil, which makes it hard to deal with stormwater and things like that. So such a small fraction of people are managing to get around through public transportation in many urban environments in India and other places. If that could be increased, it would have a large positive impact on biodiversity. And then, of course, other things like maintaining green spaces and sort of using in order to use for education for children, for all children in school, and so that people understand that the kind of role of nature in the earth. And so using our parks for education, and using the space on the outskirts of urban environments for education, and forest and things like that seem like very potentially very plausible ways to increase biodiversity.
True. And I mean, interestingly, urban spaces with more of flowering plants and all have the ability to nurture biodiversity more than what you see in rural, where there'll be more crops and others. So that, I think, yeah, I mean, it's a very...
Yeah, like the huge flowering trees and things like that. There is a lot of biodiversity in urban environments, of course, especially with,
yeah. Thank you, Saskia. Thank you. Soubadra, I have a question for you. So from your experience on nature-based solution implementations that you have done, are there any specific habitats or locations within an urbanization gradient where this will be more successful?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think I'm just talking from my experience with one ward, Jakur, where we are trying to look at terraces, not as just vegetable garden, but more as a elevated ecosystems where we try to bring, I think first start with something the stakeholders like, which is growing vegetables, and they think it's a cool thing to have fresh vegetables, and then slowly move in other things. I think when I talk about that, it's also, people now talk about floods, how these terraces also have to manage floods, because we have to have a system where we slow down the water before it reaches the strong wind. So, but then our terraces, the spaces is all elevated in the city now. So people are very wary whether it will hold, and whether they're very concerned. Of course, they were not built to hold these kind of systems, right? Growing vegetables or having some elevated green space. So I really feel, I think now, while we sort of try to do these sort of interventions in the existing thing, I think the focus should be on CREDAI and other kind of development people, where we could sort of bring in the infrastructure in future, which will have these kind of green spaces in the elevated area. I think that should be the future. But also we have lessons from other things like the solar heaters, right? I think which became compulsory to have an electricity connection. So I think the future, I think there should be a policy nudge where the societies get incentivized if they have such infrastructure to support green spaces in their terraces. I think we also have lessons from Thailand, which has a huge, the university has a big terrace, the garden, which is multifunctional. They even grow paddy in the terrace. So, I think, we have the electronic city, which is the most richest municipality. I think they have a lot of open spaces in the terrace. So I'm just saying, but with some modification, that we need exemplars, we need to demonstrate, and we need willing partners on the ground before we even talk about a policy nudge, right? To demonstrate these things. I think we have attempted, we have gone, we have met, even the minister, they said, oh, no paving. They seemed agreeable. They allowed the natural path slowly. I think some other things come in, right? There are a lot of money matters. So you eventually will have a certain formulas. Those things happen. So I'm just saying there should be somewhere, I think it should be both the approach, bottom up, where there are some best practitioners who should be identified, people who are willing to experiment with us. And also we should try to catch the attention of the policymakers. So I think it should go two ways. Otherwise, it's been very challenging on the ground to really, with the pollinator-aided home gardens also has been a big challenge for us. Yeah, to be.
Very true. Taking from that question, Meenal, I'd like to ask you, what government institutions or support systems in terms of policies do you think can be implemented for nature-based solutions?
So again, the first thing that I think would be extremely essential is to not dilute our existing laws. I think we have very good laws, a lot of urban missions that are already in place. We just need an implementation push, so that these are effectively implemented not just in cities, but also in rural areas. Um, the other thing is, again, I am uncomfortable with nature-based solutions as an all-encompassing solution. It is extremely important to have uh, some kind of clarity within India as to what we mean by nature-based solutions, because a lot of the activities um, are mitigation measures and also safeguards for large developing corporations, big infrastructure projects, and we cannot have these as incentives being doled out to large polluters. So it's important that we understand what nature-based solutions are in our context, in the Indian context, have very definitive understanding of what each of these activities mean, whether they are mitigation measures, whether they are already part of some other processes, some other laws which require certain actors to do the bare minimum that they're supposed to do. I think these are important policy challenges that are coming up in India right now, and I think it's very crucial that as citizens, even if we are urban citizens, to actually look at certain laws. The forest law, for example, how many of us know that we have a lot of forest land in our cities, and it requires permissions to be used for any sort of activity. Do we look at our development plans? Are they easily available to us as citizens? Supporting citizen actions are also some of the things that I think are crucial towards ensuring the support for not nature-based solutions, I would say, but to ensure that our biodiversity is protected, it's conserved, people dependent on it at that level are not prevented from using it. And there are holistic ways in which our development or development of our cities, there are new cities and new urban infrastructure and new urban spaces being planned. How are these being planned? So these are things that I think as citizens, as educated citizens, it is extremely important that we keep an eye on and speak out when certain things are not happening as the way that they should happen. So I think that's important.
Okay, very thoughtful. Neha, would you also like to comment on this? Which government institution supports are required for implementing policies in the space of nature-based solutions? I mean, we've heard what Meenal just said, but I'd like to hear from you as well. And
I would actually like to just echo what Meenal was saying, particularly in the sense of, the fact that, and we've seen this with other policies and, especially with other environmental policies as well, right? That you tend to have a single focus, implementation through particular sets of sectoral kind of line ministries, etc., to the detriment of a lot of other sort of integrated approaches to thinking of these types of solutions. And so, like even within just, if you just talk of food systems, it's not enough alone to look at just the science of food systems, but also to look at enabling, people who work in the sector, all the way from, agrarian communities up to the final users of the product. And so there needs to be a way of integrating all of these various stakeholders, because unless there's a link that actually connects all of these things, implementing, sort of nature-based solutions at one end to say improve pollination isn't actually necessarily going to lead to outcomes that we find or think are desirable. And so it's more than identifying any single government institution, I think it would be useful to perhaps identify ways in which we can think of this as a broad-based, kind of approach to thinking about, more kind of sustainable ways of thinking about, urban environmental concerns more broadly, because it's not necessarily just about, say, government institutions and food. So if you look at the master plan process, for example, the fact that that doesn't actually take into account any kind of, acknowledgement on sort of the urban periphery and the interface that it has with various kinds of, not just ecosystems, but also agrarian systems in this context particularly. I mean, there are lots of other things that it doesn't take into account, but the master plan actually has no space for, urban agriculture. I mean, you have to actually find ways around it to actually create that space. And so I think it's partly not just looking at it only from an environmental perspective or only from, say, the Ministry of Agriculture or, horticulture in the case of Karnataka, but looking at it much more holistically from, sort of a broad sort of urban systems approach rather than just one identifying a set of specific institutions.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Neha. I was just wondering if Soubadra, we had come across, I mean, when we tried to do our interventions and tried to place various nature-based solutions in schools and other places, there was a pushback on that at sometimes. Do you think, for instance, we tried to set up the bee hotels and there was a pushback that although they are stingless bees, I mean, these bees could be harmful for the animals. Sorry, for the students there. So, I mean, in such a scenario, how can we deal with this kind of?
You should realize that we are with maybe the fifth or sixth generation of urbanized people who have biophobia, I must say, right? They're scared of everything. In that sense, I think outreach is one thing. That's what, as I told you, this ring around the lake, which we have envisioned not as a nature-based solution, but also get the community to go beyond this paved walkway, but slow down their walk and look at the nature and appreciate it. In the process, also be a little, not only build biodiversity, but also build biodiversity positive attitude, right?
Yes.
So I think I think that way, I think the city, at least in Bangalore, there's a proliferation of this biodiversity walks, right? Earlier, birding used to be the only way out. Now people come out in the night for the frog watch and the herp watch and all that. I think it's improving, but still, I think it's only a small percentage of people who are interested, right? I think the outreach is very important. I think it's a myth that's why instead of introducing a bee that will sting like Apis cerana, which is the honeybee, we introduced the stingless bee and the carpenter, the bee hotel, that unless when you're confronted or cornered, it's not going to sting you. And even if it is single sting, it's not thing. But I think there is this fear, the biophobia. I think it'll take a while for people to understand. Yeah, so, but I think we are there. I think outreach is getting, I see a lot more people from all walks of life participate in the bat walk and all that, which is very encouraging. I think slowly, I think we are improving. I think I see it more positive. I think I'm more positive about it. Yeah, it will improve. Yeah.
Wow, nice to hear that. So one question that comes to my mind is, Meenal has repeatedly said that, the current definition of nature-based solutions doesn't seem to be appropriate. So what do you think should be, the exact definition for India? Anybody can take a stab on this. Anyone? Yes, Meenal, please.
So I think Lakshmi has asked this question in the chat. I don't think there can be a definition without consultations, large-scale consultations, including all walks of society. It's very important because often the voices that are not heard would have a very different thing to say. So to even come up with a definition or to even include it as part of decision making, it is important to have consultative processes. I'm not sure how many of us were aware that India is now almost going to submit its NBSAP. in the coming COP.
Mhm.
Who were the people invited? It was closed door meetings. They are supposed to have widespread consultations to decide on the NDSAP processes. Who decides our NDCs? So these are, I think, crucial questions before we can even come up with definitions for particular things. And India has policies that require it to ask its citizens, especially when it comes to biodiversity and climate. So I think it's important that these consultations take place, first of all, and these consultations need to be as localized as possible and then scaling up, you know. Do we have those sort of mechanisms? And then what are the ways in which we can push for those solutions for us? We do have a very short period of time, as scientists have been telling us, but this is crucial because we are going to then, if we come up with something which is the domain of a particular group of people, it's going to leave out a large section of our society, and we cannot afford to forget that we are a developing country. Not everybody is on the same level, and there are people that need to be placed on the same level as, say, all of us are. So I think it's important that consultative processes take place. So I don't think we can push for a definition unless we really understand what are the challenges, what are the wants that different people have, what are the needs, what are the different kinds of livelihoods that people are involved in. An interesting process that has started this year by the Animal Husbandry Department is to have a census of pastoralists and livestock. So that was a process which was built up by a lot of civil society pressure. That do require this kind of information on who are our pastoralists. We see them everywhere. We see them in our cities, but where do they live? What are the ecosystems that they are dependent on? Are they taken into consideration when policy push happens and implementation strategies happen on these ecosystems? So it's crucial to have consultations when we talk of what do people envision as nature-based solutions. So I think from my side, I think it would be very important to, when we're talking about mainstreaming biodiversity, it is the citizens that need to take up this challenge.
Awesome. Thank you, Meenal. Very, very thought-provoking, very interesting what you said just now. I mean, I just wanted to ask Nupur's this question. So Nupur, Pro Waste works on landfill, is interested in having zero landfills in India. And I know that, of course, doing away with landfills will help in many ways. One, it will reduce global warming to some extent because of the removal of all these. So would you like to shed some light on what exactly and how you would like to, how you are targeting this particular aim that you have in mind?
So it's very important to work at the ground level, the grassroots level with the communities, because all these years which have, we've been just collecting waste and transporting it to the landfills. All cities have these big landfills, and the very, very large part of the budgets on waste management, so-called waste management by the which our municipalities have, is just spent on transportation of waste. And we know what landfills are doing. I don't need to show the detail. And then we have a lot of solutions. No, again, what all the panelists said, that we are just trying to mitigate. We are just finding out solutions, technology to biomining, and how to again reclaim those lands. But why are we not thinking that we should stop the waste getting to the landfills? Why are we not doing that? How can we
Yeah.
just continue sending all the waste there and then having another set of technology to clean up that area? So it is very important that we have solutions which are at the root cause, that nothing is sent there. So that is what we are focusing on very, very, closely. And it is important to make people aware. We are asking these simple questions. Do you even know where your waste is going? Our communities just love to keep our, our property clean, our schools and offices clean, but they've never bothered where the waste was going. And they also spend a large amount of money to get, waste out of their premises. I mean, I would not like to name that institution, a very, very a prestigious institution of a country. I did an assessment for them. And they were spending around 2 lakh rupees per month just to get the waste out of their campus. And there's I mean, I think there's no problem of resources. These campus had a larger number of bins, that they had large, big team of housekeeping. But where the processes, where's the correct methodology or systems at the ground level so that the waste becomes a resource? I mean, there's a big question mark. So I've been working with the communities and campuses to find those answers and to help them to implement the processes so that their waste, they know where their waste is going, first of all. That's how they'll be able to at least, try to do something about it. So Pro-Waste doesn't work on technology, but it's a social problem, and we say tech magic cannot solve it. We need to create awareness among people and create processes and systems that are implemented by the people. I mean, if only people do it, then only we'll able to get the answers, and they'll be able to understand what waste management is and find correct solutions.
True. And what fraction?
Sorry, yeah.
No, what fraction of the waste is wet waste? Total waste is wet waste?
I think per person, if we say, I mean, in any family, around 60% of the waste which we generate today is organic waste in India. As a very different from what waste generated in Western countries. That also we have to keep in mind. And all that, if we can divert from landfills, we know we get a wonderful compost, and we cut down emissions. I mean, it's nothing high technology around it. And I think we've been doing it since ages. It's just that now we love to put those black cover bags, and we want to put all our bins, waste inside those cover bins, and we just want that it goes out of our sight, and we just forget to forget about it, and it's ending in water bodies. It's ending in landfills. It's being burnt illegally. So, and then also we have to understand that all categories of waste cannot be recycled, and communities, that is very important to understand what are consumption patterns. And then communities assume that it will be taken care of because we are paying taxes. Because we are paying taxes, we should not care about our waste. It is the problem of the municipality or the contractor who carries waste, and we just we assume that he will segregate it, or he will recycle it, or he will compost it. That's not right. Just paying taxes or and just thinking that our responsibility is done is not solving it. And we know, I mean, I think we need more awareness, and we have to ask the right questions. And these communities have to be responsible for their own waste. Even if there are environmental laws for plastic, laws for biomedical waste, but I think at the ground level, the community is totally unaware of all those laws. We don't know anything about it. So that's where we have to. The question lies at the root, not at the end where we've already sent the waste and we spent crores of rupees to transport it. And that money could be used for creating processes, for creating awareness, for creating systems which are implemented. I always say, and our tagline is a call to action. So we are nudging people to take action and not just think that okay, we've done our responsibility just by paying taxes and our waste will go to the landfills. We don't care. So we have to sort this out.
True, true. Very true. Actually, I mean, I was just thinking while all of you were speaking, would there be a solution that is some in the urban agriculture? Is there a solution that you all think for all of these issues, different issues that we have all brought up today? For instance, Saskia has said that biodiversity is diminishing and we have waste that is accumulating and transportation of this waste is a big challenge. Can we find solutions within our communities? Maybe urban agriculture could be an answer. I would like to hear from some of you. Yeah, Nupur, you want to say something?
I just want to say that all this is linked. We cannot say that okay, somebody is doing agriculture on the farm on the terrace, urban gardening, or somebody is only into waste, somebody is only into water. It all comes as a holistic approach. If a person has some awareness and some concern about the environment and wants to protect, he or she will adopt everything in totality, and also maybe add on. Maybe they will start using chemical-free cleaners, and they'll themselves will stop using, a lot of single-use plastic. So it comes in totality. So I think we need more and more people to, to this tribe has to grow to improve our urban ecosystem.
Correct, true. Saskia, would you like to say something on this? Oh, you are muted, Saskia.
Okay. Yes. So on the topic of urban agriculture, I guess it's quite straightforward that if more people were engaged in urban agriculture, either on terraces or in vacant lots or anything, then it would be much easier to say use compost locally by the local communities, and then it would also be advantageous for biodiversity in the urban setting. So of course that would be a solution, but I think probably, we're probably pretty far away. On average, people are not interested in growing their own food. Certainly maybe there's an increasing number of people who are actually interested in it, but it's still just a tiny fraction of most urban residents. So I guess that means that we need a lot more education, both about the value of urban agriculture and then the things that the sort of auxiliary things that would come, like using waste and biodiversity. There has to be a lot more education about that to make it a larger thing.
Yeah, correct. That leads me to the question to Neha. Neha, food systems, I mean, currently food is mostly grown in the rural in India. So the transport of food is also has its own drawbacks, and we have climate change, which is, I mean, you have global warming because of that also. So it also has a footprint. So can we think of solutions in urban agriculture through this is something that I'm trying to ask you. And how should we probably take this forward within the urban ecosystem?
Thanks, Indira. I think that, I mean, I think just practically urban agriculture is not going to feed our cities. I mean, we just don't have the ability in our urban spaces to grow enough food and the range of food that we need to feed our cities. And so I think that part of it is to think of the function that urban agriculture can do, and I think it can supplement the kinds of foods that we need. It can play a huge role in creating awareness. It can play a huge role in actually sort of making, larger urban communities aware of the kinds of challenges that agrarian communities face, and the difficulty of actually being able to grow your own food. I think that there are arguments the world over now about how distant, especially children, are growing from the actual production of food, and the way they think about where food comes from. And I think that there are a lot of other functions I think that urban agriculture can play beyond thinking of it as just a way of fulfilling our sort of food needs. And I think that to the question of thinking about, being able to produce food at scale for our cities, that in the foreseeable future at least doesn't seem likely to be something that urban agriculture can actually help us with, but rather to be able to think about, there are many initiatives in a lot of Indian cities that actually provide, support to local agrarian communities within 150 200-kilometer range of our cities. And I think those are well worth thinking of finding ways of supporting. They provide not only, it minimizes some of the challenges that you were talking about in terms of transport, in terms of in both eating seasonally and locally and supporting local communities. And I think that there are ways in which both economically and socially and environmentally, it makes sense to, rather than thinking of urban agriculture, something that happens only within the boundaries of the city, to think about ways in which sort of the urban region more broadly can think of being as close to self-sustaining as possible in terms of food, which then also means making hard choices around the kinds of food that we eat, eating, a lot more seasonally, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not, I don't think that it's not, I think, worthwhile to just focus, or not very fruitful, I think, to focus our attention only on the city as a kind of unit in and of itself, but to think of the larger kind of urban and peri-urban region, and even sort of maybe a little bit beyond that, if you take sort of 100 to 200-kilometer radius, to think about where our food actually comes from.
Awesome. Okay. Very important point. I mean, I had a different notion, but thanks to you, now, yeah, it makes sense that yes, we cannot completely depend on the urban for food. Yeah. So so that brings me to the final question, which is, so to sum it up, how do we see policy going from here? So what are the various nature-based solution policies that can be implemented? And of course, there are various drawbacks and pushbacks and various problems that we have discussed today. But still, there are some policies that definitely can be thought of and nurtured. So in the urban, for the well-being of the urban and urban society. So what do you think? Can I ask Soubadra about this?
Yeah, so before, I mean, just to add to Neha, I totally agree that it's very quickly, yeah, I mean, I don't think cities can sustain it. And I do agree on our kids getting distant from, I still remember a kid saying cornflakes comes from Kellogg's. So, I mean, I think I totally agree. They cannot meet. And COVID was one example when people started a lot of terrace gardening because they had a space, and there are federations now, and a lot of startups have grown up. People have started setting up this thing, and there was also a lot of connections between the peri-urban area farmers directly marketing to the consumers. So there are pathways which has to be nurtured. There are lessons that during COVID, having said that, where are the policy, where can it set? It cannot be in one agriculture or anything. It should be in multiple departments and through multiple schemes which energize some of these efforts. And we cannot look at agriculture as just for agriculture, as Neha was highlighting. But definitely the multifunctionality would help. The agriculture could act as a hook to sort of get people in because they get something out of it. And I think it cannot be agriculture policy under agriculture, but it has to be sitting in multiple, the biodiversity laws, and it should be built in multiple things. My submission. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Meenal, you'd like to say something?
So I'm not an expert on urban agriculture, or even urban food systems. But generally, if we are looking at how policy is going to work out in the international arena, because I have been following the CBD, the so there is a general push towards adopting nature-based solutions, but it is going to be a tough fight for parties because most of the caucuses are again saying that you need to define what nature-based solutions are for us to be able to even understand. And I'm just talking not just about the urban, but especially in the context of the marginalized sections, women, youth, as well as indigenous peoples and local communities, because some of the push towards nature incentives, as well as solutions to climate change and biodiversity have often meant that the marginalized people, the indigenous communities are left away. And also in a lot of ways are affected negatively. We are looking at many of the solutions being touted as NDS. So that's going to be a tough, it's definitely going to be a point of contention in the CBD COP this time, especially since it has got very closely associated with finances and resource mobilization. And I don't want to get into the whole North-South debate on it, but it's going to be a tough, interesting but tough sort of negotiation policy-wise, at least in the CBD. I don't think that the UNFCCC has also come up with a solid definition of what NDS is. So a lot of the caucuses are going to look at that now. And what are the kinds of things being pushed under this umbrella term. So there's going to be a lot of caution. In terms of just looking at the way urbanization is going on at the scale, I think I completely agree with what I think Neha and Soubadra had pointed out. We cannot look at our cities as different from the landscape, right? This has to be a landscape level approach to look at things. And if we keep looking at our cities as isolated units, I don't think that it is going to any kind of policies that we push right now are going to be effective in the long term. So I think there is a need to really evaluate this urban-rural kind of divide when it comes to landscapes. I don't think it's going to work anymore. Also with the connectivity pushes by not just regional governments but also the central governments. So we do have to start looking at where the urbanization sort of juggernaut is rolling and what are the different things that we require. We'll have to preempt a lot of things,
right,
for them to work.
Okay. Thank you, Meenal. Thank you very much. So I think we have had a wonderful discussion wherein lots of interesting points emerged. One was that we need to build biodiversity positive attitude among the citizens. And then there are various ways of doing it, and it has been happening in some way in Bangalore, but in other cities across India also, these things need to be nurtured, and biodiversity walks and other things. People need citizen science. So people need to be aware of their environment and the biodiversity, and the need for following good practices, like what Nupur has been continuously saying, that the main issue lies in the fact that people are not willing to do the waste segregation or even participate in the very important point of waste segregation today. The other important point that emerged was that there is a consultative workshop or discussions need to happen to understand what is the exact definition of nature-based solutions for India and in the policy and climate space. So various things, even urban agriculture, it cannot definitely support us continue in terms of food sustainability. Of course, we'll have to depend on the rural, but then there has to be a very thoughtful action such that, you know, food is procured from neighborhood regions. And we are also building the biodiversity within by our integrated action on urban agriculture, which can be a solution, which is not really a solution for food, but it can be a self-sustaining model for taking up all the waste, and also wet waste, which is around 60% of our total waste that is generated from cities. So we can help in many ways, and there are policies that can be defined through all these discussions. But then there is more that is needed. More action has to come up, and we'll need more insights from people like you to take this further. I'd now open the session to our audience. If they have any questions, maybe I can read them out, and then probably we can take the discussion further. So we'll have just 5 more minutes, or maybe 10 more minutes for these questions. And yeah, so I'll just read those questions. If anybody has any questions. Acha, so Neha. So one of the questions is, what should be the key considerations to develop training and capacity building initiatives to leverage feasibility of nature-based solutions in cities? What should be the key considerations to develop training and capacity building initiatives to leverage feasibility of nature-based solutions in cities? Nomi Gupta has asked us this question. Anybody wants to answer this? Soubadra?
Well, I don't know if we are arrived there to even train others. I think we need to build more evidence. I think to say, I mean, I think before we even train others, I think build capacities. I think a lot of experimentation,
more research
evidence
is needed.
building. That's I feel, yeah. So
okay. Okay.
yes.
Any other thoughts? Anybody? Neha, you want to say something? Okay. Yeah, Nupur.
I think
Yeah, I think that we should have catched up to these youngsters, and there should be experts who start connecting with our young generation when they're in school. Although there's a lot of they're studying in textbooks, but I think we should have programs at the in our education policy that they start practicing it. So that would help that our future, they get interested in doing this.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Thank you. I hope Nomi would be satisfied with the answers. The next question to our panelists, this is for Neha. Thanks for bringing in the master plan into the conversation. The gaps in how an MP is imagined conventionally and non-inclusion of food systems. Okay, sorry, I'm sorry. Actually, I'm unable to read it very clearly.
No worries. I can read it from
Yeah. Okay.
on.
Yeah.
So thanks, Mita. Thanks for asking this. I think that the part of the challenge is actually in how master planning is imagined, focused very much on the city limits and zoning and land use related questions. It also, frankly, comes from our imagination of what the urban is, right? Our census definition defines the urban as something where the majority of the population doesn't work in agrarian economies, and so I think part of it is fundamentally to how we think about the urban and how we can actually sort of broaden that. But I think for just thinking about the master plan itself, I think it's useful to actually, like you're saying, think about a regional plan, but also have and therefore then have inputs from not just urban institutions, but from regional communities, etc., figure out a way of planning this at a much broader scale than that just the city, and then think of sort of nested ways of doing it. And there are examples of cities around the world that have actually incorporated various forms of urban agriculture, both through allotment systems, which are sort of very well known and understood, but also terrace gardening, various other ways of doing it. So happy to talk more sort of offline with you about this as well. Also,
Thank you.
just on the training and capacity building question, I think that it's all equally important to not just talk to folks who are younger, and while the school system is very important, I think it's equally important to have lifelong learning that happens within sort of state institutions, within like across multiple stages of this process. Because at this point, if we wait for sort of to play catch up with sort of from schools all the way up, it's going to take us a couple of generations by the time we're actually building capacity to be able to deal with this kind of challenge.
Yeah, nice. Thank you, Neha, and thank you, Smita, for that question. Andrew Hughes has asked a question. I wonder how the panel thinks we might address issues of urban informalities in contexts where increasingly revanchist municipal states are seeking to world cities, to borrow Ananya Roy's terms. Though quite a different setting. I worked on an NBS composting or river restoration project in Lilongwe. I don't know, I'm sorry, Malawi, which collapsed relatively quickly due to tensions between the more inclusive NGO and repressive municipality that wished to modernize the city, resulting in working against informality rather than with it. So, yeah. He's a PhD researcher in urban planning at the University of Sheffield. I wonder how the panel thinks we might address issues of urban informality in context where increasingly revanchist municipal states are seeking to world cities, to borrow Ananya Roy's term.
I can try responding to that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew, for your question. I think part of the challenge is thinking a little bit about, speaking very much from an Indian context, municipalities actually don't have a lot of power and agency to implement and come up with their own policy solutions. But that said, we are beginning to see a lot of this this kind of play out on the ground in ways that don't take into account questions of not just informality in terms of settlements, but also, informal economies, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that part of the challenge really is, again, to me, it goes back to the tools that we use to plan and think of our city, the master plan being one of them, but also the fact that all of these things sit separately in the way our cities are governed, right? There's very little, and again, I'm speaking very much from the Indian context and not so much, I'm not quite as familiar with Malawi, but to think of how we can, actually integrate, economic development planning together with mobility, together with environmental questions, rather than thinking of them as kind of siloed, approaches to both sort of urban questions, but sort of urban and regional questions more broadly. But I'm also happy to sort of, I know we have limited time here, so I can, take this conversation offline as well if you're interested, Andrew.
Thank you, Neha. Sharath has asked a question. What role does citizens and civic groups play with respect to behavioral change in the way NBS needs to be scaled in cities? What are the roles of citizens and civic groups with respect to behavioral change? Anybody wants to take? Soubadra.
Okay, so well, I think first of all, I think the generation or the citizens on ground always think technology as a solution. So there's a lot of people are very wary when we say nature can really meet some of this requirement. They may be right, so we might need hybrid. So that is another part of the problem. For example, from our experience in the riparian restoration and the river restoration, when we said we could have a nature-based solution at a very local scale and have a decentralized model where and socialize managing, there was a lot of skepticism around that. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, first of all, I think proof is in the pudding. So we really have to demonstrate all the claims that some of this nature-based solution claim to do, right? As rightly pointed out many times. So we have the stall claims that clean the water and all that. So there is a need to have this exemplars and proof. Only then I think we'll have a lot of buy-in. Yeah. So because as you said, we don't even have a definition. So where is the question of even taking it and nudging a behavioral change to accept this? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question is, what improvements can be done on governance systems and policy formulation levels that can incorporate informal waste management sectors to build a more robust waste management and resource recovery system for establishing circular economy practices? Nupur, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, so one is compliance, that is very missing. There's a gap there, you know, and then also producer responsibility is very, the EPR has to be very tough. Then only, you know, we'll be able to build up systems so that post production the circular economy is benefited. So there's a huge gap as of now. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, what are the effective financial mechanisms such as green bonds or carbon credits for funding NBS initiatives? Meenal, would you like to go for this? Oh, has Meenal left?
Yeah, I think Meena had to drop off.
Okay, she had to go, right? She had mentioned. So anybody wants to answer this question? What effective financial mechanisms such as green bonds or carbon credits for funding nature-based solution initiatives? What are they?
I mean, I can try. I'm not really, you know, an expert. This really isn't my area, but I can attempt and answer. If there are others on the panel, please do jump in. I think on the question of sort of financial mechanisms, at this point, it depends on, I think, the scale of the investment that we're trying to make and the kind of solution that we're proposing. So, you know, like we've seen even through the questions and some examples that the panel came up with, it's all the way from thinking about, you know, like we're doing in our project, you know, pollinators all the way to sort of riverfront restoration projects. And depending on the kind of project you're undertaking and the kind of solution you want to implement, the funding mechanism will essentially vary. And there are all of these. I mean, there are sort of green credit mechanisms available, you know, that are increasingly kind of being offered. There are bonds, carbon credits, but a lot of this also in terms of just thinking about the sort of financial market more broadly around, especially carbon credits, etc. There are also questions about kind of who pays for these, where does the burden of actually financing these lie, and particularly if, you know, there are kind of deep rooted sort of inequalities in how these eventually end up playing out. Because if you're talking about city governments right now, city governments are extremely sort of cash strapped and don't actually have access to a lot of their own funding resources. So a lot of access to funding, whether through, you know, the market or through state, etc., does end up being mediated through higher levels of government as well. But there are other colleagues at IIHS who work on this question a lot more, and we'd be very happy to direct you to them if you have more questions on this. Saskia, maybe.
Yes, Saskia.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, I don't really know about the financial options or mechanisms, but certainly what I've learned about carbon credits and green bonds and things is that it's quite hard to get them to be actually as far as say contributing to there being reduction in climate change or contributing to increased biodiversity, that simply buying biodiversity is quite difficult to actually implement. And for the most part, I'm kind of cynical about whether those work. So even if there were money that came from the right sources, you know, to sort of buy green credits, that doesn't mean that those credits are actually going to be green. And there's, you know, just simply planting trees doesn't necessarily increase biodiversity if those trees can't grow there, or if they're invasive or things like that. And so I think there's a huge variability in whether or not that's feasible, even if there were financial sort of mechanisms for it.
Very true. Thank you. Thank you, Neha and Saskia. So the next question is, what are the limitations and uncertainties associated with the long-term performance and effectiveness of NBS in urban environments? Yeah, anybody wants to go for this? Long-term performance and effectiveness of NBS. Of course, I see, yeah, I think I'll direct this again to Soubadra only, because she has been implementing nature-based solutions. So,
well, I think first of all, it should be decentralized. In the rural context, you know, this district, you know, they take responsibility and they never come for DVATs and stuff like that. The same context in the cities, I guess the RWAs, the resident welfare, should step in. But of course, we have to build their capacities and this thing to take. I mean, other centralized thing is not going to work. We see such turnovers of officials and other things. So there's a lot of memory loss of where you implement this and what happens. I think that's been the case. That's been the learning. So,
yeah, true. Yeah. Okay, we come to our last question. Given that many climate action plans identify nature-based solutions as potential mitigation strategies, but there is a lack of comprehensive documentation on existing NBS projects. How can we build a strong case for securing funds for these initiatives? What methods or frameworks can be employed to effectively showcase the benefits and long-term values of NBS to attract government and private sector investments? Neha, would you like to try this?
I mean, I think that it's both in response to this and to actually partly to the earlier question as well, is that I think it's useful. I think perhaps Meenal pointed this out earlier. But I think that it's useful to not think of nature-based solution as a single kind of monolithic bucket, right? There are, like we've all been saying, there's a spectrum of these you know, solutions that can be used depending on what the problem really is that we're facing on the ground. And so while they may not be, I mean, it's very difficult to then say what is the sort of comprehensive kind of listing of all of these projects. I'm not even sure that's actually feasible or desirable. But I think that, you know, there are, for certain types of projects, for certain kinds of problems, there is work that's already out there on, you know, kind of, so for example, in the context of urban agriculture, a lot of these also end up being contextual, right? You can't really take nature-based solutions that work even within, say, you know, the Bangalore metro region apply to other parts of Karnataka just because they're climatically so different. And so I think especially when we're dealing with environmental questions, I would like to kind of caution us against having this kind of, you know, best practice sort of approach to saying, here are a comprehensive list of things and here's what worked and here's what didn't work, but rather to actually approach the question problem first and see what it is that we're trying to solve for, who are the different kinds of stakeholders involved, and then look for ways in which, you know, others in similar contexts and similar kind of situations have worked towards solutions here, rather than looking for sort of a comprehensive kind of listing of all of these, because I'm not sure that's actually a very helpful kind of exercise, because these are just many different kinds of ways of approaching a whole vast range of problems that deal with very, very complex systems.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you. I think we've covered all our questions now. So I think we had a wonderful panel discussion and we had covered a range of questions, including, and the audience also brought up some really interesting questions, which I had also thought would ask, but then I missed asking on financing, etc. So I think we've had a wonderful discussion, and I'm hopeful that something good will emerge from all of this. We will have some good policies in place and and also eventually the definition of NBS should be coming through with all the consultative workshops and the COP discussions that are coming up that Meenal had mentioned. So we are in for a lot of good, and hopefully India will start implementing these nature-based solutions, and we'll have our more awareness building activities ongoing through various projects. And also financing has to be a channel that needs to be brought in. There has to be some sort of methods of financing these schemes. So there are various things that have come up from this, various questions that have come up from this, which need further research and thought. So with that, I end this session and webinar, and thank you very much, all panelists, for joining me on this session. Really useful. Thank you.